As Futurama is back on TV and the first episode has just aired, I've decided to celebrate the return of one of my favourite TV series of all time. Very soon, either on this channel or over on Twitch, I'll be streaming this, the PS2 Futurama game, so if you're interested in that, subscribe to me here on YouTube or go follow me over on Twitch. The archives, either way, will be made publicly available here on YouTube after they've been done on there, so it's worth subscribing to me here as well as follow me over on Twitch. What I want to do right now, though, is I want to celebrate the history of Futurama and go over every episode from the very first episode to the last finale we had, meanwhile, and rank them all, every single Futurama episode, from worst to best. Alright, so as we should, we're starting off with Space Pilot 3000, the very first episode of Futurama. This is our introduction to the world and the characters, and overall, they do all of this really, really well. The characters that they establish in this episode are Fry, Leela, Bender, and the Professor, as well as a few other characters dotted around here and there. None of the other main characters are introduced in this, which I think is a good idea considering the fact that Futurama has a relatively big main cast. They only introduce the four main characters, which is kind of a good idea because they can give every character the right amount of attention without getting them drowned out by all the other characters. And they can focus just on the plot and establishing what they need to with these characters. The world building of Futurama kind of tells us everything we need to know about the year 3000 going forward, and the plot itself is funny and it's really good. Fry has escaped the year 2000, albeit not by his own choice, where his life kind of sucked. He was a delivery driver in a dead-end job, and he's kind of being forced into a job in the future of being a delivery driver in a dead-end job, and Fry's kind of trying to escape from Leela, who's trying to force him into that job, and then eventually gives up and accepts his role in that career, obviously causing Leela to realise that she doesn't like her life and her job, and she quits as well. Ending with them going to Planet Express, Fry getting a job as a delivery boy there, and getting very excited about it, obviously, because he gets to do it in outer space. So, Space Pilot 3000, I think, is a very, very good episode, so I'm going to put it in very good. The series has landed, kind of does everything Space Pilot 3000 does, but to a bigger degree. We get to see the other members of the cast, Amy, Zoidberg, Hermes, and we get to see more of this world. The plot itself centers around them doing delivery to the moon. Obviously, we get to see that contrast between Fry and the characters from the future. Going to the moon is this great, amazing thing that Fry has never had the chance to do. To them, it's kind of this monotonous day out, and we see that conflict get turned up a notch whenever they're sort of talking about that. Fry really wants to go to the surface of the moon. Leela's just sort of like, yeah, there's nothing out there. Eventually, Fry gets his way and they go out to the surface of the moon. And it ends with this really nice scene where Fry gets Leela to really understand how he sees the moon, how he saw the moon growing up in the year 2000, how it was very different from her, where space travel's been a normal, everyday occurrence. And I think that sort of relatability between the characters really sets up that Futurama is not just a comedy, it's also going to have a lot of heart as well. It also reinforces this idea that Fry and Leela are going to have a will they, won't they relationship. And again, it does a fantastic job of setting up the world, the characters, the relationships between all of them. And it's an interesting story weaved in between it. Another very good episode. I think it actually does a better job than Space Pilot 3000, so I'm going to put it above Space Pilot 3000 on this tier list. Outside Fry and Leela, Fry and Bender is another one of the big relationships in this series going forward, and I Roommate is the kind of first buddy adventure Fry and Bender get. It's kind of like their bonding episode, and we get to bond with these characters as they themselves are bonding. Fry is living in Bender's apartment. He kind of has to stand up to sleep because it's a robot apartment. It's basically a cupboard, and they seek to try and find a new place to live. There's a really fun sequence where they're looking at all these different futuristic apartments, which is a really funny, really fun sequence. Eventually, they move into an apartment that's kind of perfect for Fry, but not for Bender. And it ends with a hilarious joke where Fry decides to move back into Bender's place and asks if he has somewhere with a window for them to put his plant. And Bender shows him the closet, which is basically a fully functional flat, essentially, apartment. And Fry decides to live in there. That's really funny plot twist towards the end. Yeah, I'm going to put that in very good. Whereas the series as landing kind of sets up the Futurama is going to have a lot of heart. I Roommate, while it does have a lot of heart, ends on a more funny ending. kind of showing that Futurama is also going to be a hilarious series, which it is. Love's Labour's Lost in Space is the first time we really get to jump in with these characters on their job as delivery drivers for Planet Express, and we get to have the introduction to the characters of Nibbler, Zap Brannigan, and Kif as well. It's a funny episode, you know, it's our introduction to Nibbler. They're sent to a planet which is about to be destroyed due to its mining of resources, causing the planet to become hollow. But Nibbler eats all the animals before they can save them. There's a B plot where Zap Brannigan has slept with Leela while arresting them for trying to save the animals. It's a fun episode. It's a funny episode. I'm going to put it towards the bottom of very good, I think. Yeah, I'm going to put it towards the bottom of very good, I think. It's not as good as the other episodes that we've gone through so far, but you know what, Futurama is a series with such a high level of quality that you're going to be hard pushed to find a bad episode, although we will get there. I really like Fear of Bot Planet. The crew have to deliver some nuts and bolts to a planet where being a human is illegal and they will kill you on sight. So Bender's the one who has to make the delivery. And then when Bender gets captured and then later becomes part of that society, Fry and Leela have to dress like robots and pretend to be robots to go and save him. Obviously, it ends with them being captured and arrested as being human. And it's overall just a fun episode with a lot of funny jokes in there, a lot of sort of insight into why the robots on this planet don't like humans, and a lot of it is to do with lies, using humans as scapegoats to avoid the fact that their politicians are corrupt. So I'm going to put Fear of Bot Planet in there, and I'm going to put it probably above Our Roommate, I think. A Fistful of Dollars is probably the worst episode we've talked about so far. Fry goes back to his bank from 1,000 years ago, which only had a few dollars in it, and after 1,000 years of interest, he's now worth billions. So Fry kind of goes on a spending spree, buying a lot of this old technology that he remembers from the 20th century, and ends up with kind of like this bidding war with Mom over the last can of anchovies to exist on the planet. Mom wants them because she thinks that Fry is this really smart businessman, really smart scientist who wants to use the anchovy oil to put her out of business. And Fry just wants to eat them. And it leads to a really funny scene where Mom's sons and Pamela Anderson's head try and convince Fry that living in the year 3000 was all just a dream, and that he's still in the year 2000 to try and get his PIN number to take all of his money from him. It's not a good ending for Fry, but it's funny. I'm just going to put it towards the bottom of very good. My Three Sons centers around the crew having to deliver a package to a planet with 3 suns, and Fry has to make the journey on his own through a desert. There's a really funny scene where he's waiting for the sun to go down, but because his planet has 3 suns, another one instantly rises. He gets to the place where he's delivering the package, which is kind of the planet's palace. He sees a bottle of water lying around. He drinks it. Turns out this planet is inhabited by water people, and he gets possessed by the emperor of these people, and he becomes the emperor until it turns out that the emperor is still alive, and they have to try and get the emperor out of Fry by making him cry before the people of the planet can cut Fry open to get him out. Again, it's another fun story, another fun episode. I'm going to put it in very good, but I'm going to put it sort of here. I think between Love's Labour's Lost in Space and A Fistful of Dollars is the perfect place for this episode. There's a lot of really funny jokes in it, and yeah, I'm going to put it there. A Big Piece of Garbage is, I think, a little bit of a mixed bag, but overall I think it's good. The professor invents a smelloscope to smell different smells in outer space. Fry's using it and discovers a really horrible smell. It turns out it's a big piece of garbage that New York sent into outer space in the 2000s, and it's on its way back to Earth. It's going to destroy New York if it hits the planet. So there's a lot of funny jokes in this episode involving Bart dolls and Bender literally eating the doll's shorts when he pulls the string on it. There's also a scene where they try and put the detonation device on the big ball of garbage, but it turns out the professor, because he's so old, has put it in upside down. So instead of 25 minutes, they've got 52 seconds to get off the garbage ball, which obviously they can't do, so they have to throw it off the garbage ball. It's just a really funny episode with a good story in there about how we need to basically take better care of our rubbish, our garbage, and just do a better job of disposing of it. But overall, I'm going to put this in good. So good episodes are still good, they're just not as good for Futurama quality. Hell is Other Robots, I'm actually going to put in a league of its own. It's a really funny story. Bender has found religion after becoming a drug addict, and relapses and gets taken to Robot Hell. I like how Robot Hell, although this is retconned later on in the series, isn't a place where dead robot souls go to spend eternity. It's just a physical place where they take robots who have sinned too much as part of this religion, and the robot devil, instead of being the supernatural entity, is literally just a robot torturing other robots. But I do like the fact there's no supernatural elements within this episode when it comes to Robot Hell and the Robot Devil. One of the most catchy songs in the history of Futurama is in this episode. The Robot Devil sings it to Bender. Fry and Leela also get a line. I've been singing this song pretty much non-stop since I was a child. When I first saw this episode, it's really catchy, and yeah, it's a very, very big part of the reason why it's in a league of its own.
I don't feel well. It's up to us to rescue him. Maybe he likes it here in hell. It's us who tempted him to sin. Maybe he's back at the motel. Come on, Fry, don't be scared. I'm sure at least one of us will be spared. So just sit back and enjoy the ride. My ass has blisters from the slide.
Normally when TV shows do film parodies, they're not normally that good. And A Flight to Remember isn't one of those examples. It's a parody of the Titanic, but it changes enough for it to be a good episode in its own right. The Titanic is now in outer space. Instead of hitting an iceberg, it hits an asteroid and it's on its way into a black hole. And they change enough about this episode to still make it a good episode in and of itself. They do more of this, will they, won't they, with Fry and Leela. We also get to see the relationship between Amy and her parents. We get to see more of Zach Brannigan harassing Leela, which is going to become an ongoing thing throughout the series. And overall, I think it's really good. It's really funny. I'm going to put it in very good, and I'm probably going to put it around here. Because especially as far as film parodies go, A Flight to Remember is incredibly good. Mostly because it doesn't rely on the parody itself. It uses it as a backdrop to establish its own themes and carry its own weight. And that's what I like the most about this. Mars University is the first sort of average episode. I'm going to put it in average. There's a B plot in this episode that I really don't care about, involving the Dean of Mars University having it out for Robot House. It's not that funny. And the main plot with Fry's rivalry with Gunter the Talking Monkey, it's kind of hit and miss. Some of the parts are funny, some of them aren't. I just generally don't enjoy college-themed episodes or films, and this being sort of like a parody of the college-themed TV series, it just doesn't resonate with me that much. When aliens attack, I'm also going to put this in average as well. The science is there. This is the introduction to the Omicronians and how they're watching 1,000-year-old TV, because I'm assuming they are over 1,000 light years away. It takes that long for the signals to reach their planet. And they're angry that Ally McBeal has been cancelled, a TV series from the 2000s. And they head to Earth to demand more episodes get made, or they'll destroy the planet. So the Planet Express crew have to create episodes and make them up and say, yeah, here are the missing episodes, and give them to the Omicronians. It's kind of funny the way they try and get out of it. I'm actually going to put this over Mars University. Thinking about it, I think I want to put this in good, actually, because it does a good job of introducing who the Omicronians are. And it is kind of funny the way that the Planet Express crew trying to get themselves out of this. But overall, I don't really care too much about the story. Yeah, it's kind of like sort of between good and average. It's on the good side of average, basically. Fry and the Slime Factory, I guess this isn't in order. I think it's more or less in order, but this is the actual series finale for Season 1. It's another film parody. It's kind of weird they put 2 in the first season. This, I think, carries its own weight less than A Flight to Remember. This leans way more into the film parody side of things, but I do think it serves its purpose. I'm going to put it in the high end of good. I don't really want to put it in very good, because unlike A Flight to Remember, it doesn't carry its own themes and carry its own weight as well. So I'm going to put it in good, because there's nothing wrong with it, but when it comes to being a film parody, it's a lot more, I wouldn't say recognisable, because you can recognise that A Flight to Remember is a Titanic parody, but it leans too much into the parody compared to A Flight to Remember. I think that's the big difference there. I Second That Emotion is another one that I'm not too keen on. Bender gets his emotions synced up with Leela after flushing Nibbler down the toilets. So he rushes in there to save him, and there's a plot with them trying to save Nibbler. I feel like the plot's kind of all over the place. I'm going to put it in average, but I'm going to put it above Mars University. I feel like they could have done a lot more with this story. Overall, I think it's on the verge of forgettable. Brannigan, again, is very funny. Zach Brannigan gets fired due to his complete and utter incompetence. and becomes a member of the Planet Express crew. He usurps Leela as the captain of Planet Express, and they basically beg her to come back because Zap's about to kill them all. I want to put this at the top of good. Maybe at the bottom of very good, but I'm going to put it at the top of good. Because while it is a good episode, and I do enjoy it when I watch it, it is largely forgettable. So I am going to put it there. Ahead in the polls is a very popular episode. Richard Nixon is running for president and has bought Bender's body, Bender sold his body to try and get some money. There's a Watergate joke in there, which I'm too young and too British to understand. It takes a lot for me to enjoy a very, very sort of like political episode. When I say political episode, I mean literally politics, a political race and stuff like that. I'm going to put it in middle of good. It doesn't resonate too much with me. Maybe, I don't know. It just doesn't resonate too much with me. It obviously started off the whole Richard Nixon being president of Earth. But aside from that, there's not really much in it for me to enjoy. So yeah, I think middle of good. Xmas Story is the introduction to Evil Robot Santa. I feel like just based on that, it should go into a league of its own, or high very good, but it's not even my favourite Evil Santa episode. Basically, in the 2800s, a robot Santa was created to give presents to good children and punish bad children, but something went wrong in his programming and he just judges everybody to be naughty, apart from Zoidberg for some reason. And he also considers being out after curfew to be naughty, and Fry and Leela are out after dark and he's trying to kill them. It's a good episode. It's just not my favourite Evil Santa episode, and I'm just well aware of that. I think I'm going to put it at the top of good. Like, very at the top. Because I feel like the next Santa episode, they really steps it up. So based on that, I'm going to put it in good. Why Must I Be a Crustacean in Love? I actually really like this episode. A lot. Zoidberg's basically in heat. So they take him to his home planet to reproduce. And the woman he has a crush on falls in love with Fry. And it's really funny. Like, the love triangle storyline is just hilarious, the way that they do it in this episode. And the reveal at the end that his species basically has to choose between a life without sex or dying a gruesome death. It's really funny. And, yeah, no, I'm putting it in very good. The Lesser of Two Evils. This is the introduction of Flexo, Bender's rival. I love the reveal that after Fry's suspicious of Flexo throughout the entire episode, it turns out Bender's the evil version of the two of them. There's also a B plot about them trying to get a tiara to the Miss Universe pageant. Based on the ending, I'm going to put it towards the top of good. But the overall episode isn't as good. But the revelation at the end that out of the two, Fry thinks that Flexo is the evil one, and then it just turns out that Bender's the evil one at the end. You know, the revelation at the end is what bumps this episode up a lot for me. Put Your Head on My Shoulders is really, really good. Fry and Amy start going out, and they break up around Valentine's Day. She gets a new date, and after they get into a car crash, Fry's head is sewn onto Amy's shoulder so that he can stay alive while Zoidberg tries to fix his body. And Fry's kind of literally the third wheel and can't escape on Amy's date. I actually really like this episode. I'm going to put this quite high in very good. It takes the whole third wheel concept episode, which is already, you know, a very overused, very funny trope, and kind of adds this sort of sci-fi Futurama, futuristic twist to it. And I also like at the end as well, Leela is the one who saves Fry from having to be literally the third wheel while Amy and her date go and do what they're about to go and do, if you know what I mean. Which is more sort of will they, won't they from Fry and Leela, which they kind of sowed the seeds for a lot in the original run of the series. And I really like the way they take it in that direction with this. Leela gets into conversation she doesn't care about with Amy's date just to stop them from going back and doing what they're going to do. No, I really like that episode. It's really good. Raging Bender, I'm going to put it in average. I don't really care about the concept. Bender basically becomes a robot fighter. A Biclops built for two. I'm going to put that at the bottom of good. Leela thinks she's found her home planet and found the person she needs to be with. He's an abusive piece of shit. But she thinks that she has to endure that to stay with him to keep her species alive. And it turns out he's actually a shapeshifter and has conned many women with multiple varying numbers of eyes into this con. Yeah, overall, especially once you know for a fact that he's a liar, there's not really much else to this episode. It's kind of funny in parts, but overall, it's not an episode I rush back to. A Clone of My Own is literally the introduction of Cubert, is the clone of the Professor. We've got a plot where the Professor's actually 160 years old and not 150 like he tells people. And when you turn 160, you get taken to the near Death Star, where old people are kept on life support essentially forever. And they have to go and save the Professor. Again, I'm going to put this in the middle of good. It's a fine episode. Cubert himself is an alright character. The near Death Star concept is a good concept. But it doesn't explain why the Professor's still alive 20 years later. But yeah, no, it's a fine episode. It's got themes that aren't really touched on much going forward. How Hermes requisitioned his groove back is easily going into a league of its own. Mostly for the song at the end, which again is one of the best songs Futurama has ever done. But there's more to the episode than that puts it in this tier. The episode itself is really good. Hermes is getting investigated by the central bureaucracy to make sure that his office is in order, to try and promote him. Bender gets into a fight over some X-ray glasses during a game of poker. Hermes' office gets absolutely trashed, and he gets fired. Morgan Proctor, another bureaucrat, takes over, falls in love with Fry, falls in love with his messiness, and when Bender finds out, she sends his brain to the central bureaucracy, leading to Hermes coming back and belting out an absolute banger of a song. And yeah, it's in a league of its own. It's one of the best episodes Futurama's ever done. It's one I'll just go back to. If I'm just going to watch one episode of Futurama, this is one of the episodes I'll just go to.
A man turned pro.
I was sorting, but I wasn't smiling.
He forgot that it's not about badges and rank.
It's supposed to be about the filing. People, we didn't choose to be bureaucrats. No, that's what Almighty Jah made us. We treat people like swine and make them stand in line, even if nobody paid us.
The Deep South is a really good episode. I'm going to put it towards the bottom of very good, though. The crew get sent to the bottom of the sea while on a fishing trip, and they discover the lost city of Atlanta, Georgia, which was moved to the middle of the sea and subsequently sank. There's an explanation for why the people of Atlanta evolved into mermaids, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but the episode kind of acknowledges that it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think the writers knew this doesn't make any sense, we're just going to shoehorn it in anyway. That's part of the joke, and it does work. It is funny. There's a B plot about Zoidberg trying to find a new home while he's in the bottom of the sea. Yeah, it's a fine episode. I really like the joke at the end where Fry decides he's going to stay in Atlanta and then realises him and Ariel have got very different reproductive parts, shall we say. She has the bottom part fish, and he has obviously bottom part human because he is human. And they ends up with him running off, try and catch up with the Planet Express ship. I think I'm going to move up to here, actually. I do really like it. I think it's a really good episode. I think it's really funny. Bender gets made. Bender joins the Robot Mafia. And yeah, that's kind of it. It's kind of like a mobster story. There's a B plot involving Leela going blind. It's going in... I'm going to put it in the bottom of good. I think it's around this sort of tier. Yeah, Bender has to pretend to beat himself up at the end or something. It's not amazing. It's not one of the best episodes. It's at the bottom of good, I'd say, is a really fair place to put that. Mother's Day, I feel like, is a concept that really got wasted. The idea of a robot revolution in the year 3000 makes sense, and it's something they could have really built a big plot over, but the fact that they do it because Mum is heartbroken over something that happened 200 years ago, and the only way to get her to stop is for the Professor to seduce her, I'm going to put it in the bottom of good. Again, it's a fine episode. It just wastes the potential of a robot revolution, which I feel like could have been a lot bigger. I feel like a later episode in the series uses the robot revolution concept a lot better, but we'll get to there when we get to it. The problem with Poppers is, I'd say, good. There's a funny set part of this episode where the Omicronians can't tell the difference between a leader and a giant ape. Yeah, I'd say it's good. It's not great. Basically, the Planet Express crew find a new source of food, and it turns out they're Omicronian young. And after selling it to millions of people, the Omicronians are pissed. They come to Earth and they say, yeah, we'll forgive you as long as we can eat the first human that ate them, which is Leela. There's not really much else I can say. It's fine. Anthology of Interest 1. I'm putting this at the top of very good. All 3 parts of this episode are amazing. There's a reason why the Anthology of Interest episodes are really, really popular. So we got a story about Bender being 500 feet tall. If Leela was just a little bit more impulsive, which involves her killing the rest of the Planet Express crew. And what if Fry was never frozen and sent to the future, which literally destroys the entire universe. So all 3 parts are really funny, really good, really well written. And there's a reason why these episodes are so popular. It's because this episode established the trend and the quality that we were going to see going forward. Definitely my favourite part of this is if Leela was just a little bit more impulsive. It's just really funny, and they just went wild. It's the first chance they had to really kill off all the characters in a non-canon sense. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. War is the H word. I'm going to put that in good, but like middle good. There's a few weird jokes in there, like how Leela's a woman, so why would she be in the military? Which is strange. That would be an outdated concept in the year 2000, let alone the year 3000. There is some funny jokes in there, like Fry and Bender signing up to the military just to get a discount on gum, and then in the 30 seconds it takes for them to get the gum and then come back, war's been declared.
Sign here on the dotted line, Patriots, and I'll give you your discount cards.
Just out of curiosity, we could use the cards to buy gum, then immediately quit the army, right?
You know, playing you off for chumps.
Correct. There's no obligation. Unless, of course, war were declared.
What's that?
War were declared.
So they have to go off to fight a war. It's silly, but it's funny. But I'm going to put it in middle of good. The honking I'm going to put in bad and forgettable. Futurama is, believe it or not, a series set in the future. We want to see sci-fi concepts. This lent too much into the supernatural for my liking. It's literally just a werewolf story where Bender turns into a werecar. I appreciate the fact that we have Calculan's backstory with this episode. But overall, I think the honking is... It's not an episode I'll rewatch if I have the choice. When it comes to episodes I will watch if I have the choice, The Cryogenic Woman, I'm going to put that in high A. Very high A, I think. Fry's girlfriend, Michelle, comes to the year 3000 from the year 2000. Not to find Fry, but because her life's fallen apart in the year 2000. And we see that kind of contrast in Fry's reaction to the futuristic stuff compared to Michelle's. You can see there in the picture. She's freaked out by everything she's seeing. Fry's absolutely fine with it. Leela's explanation of why that is because Fry was a bit of a fish out of the water in the year 2000. Michelle wasn't. And Fry is not really a fish out of water in the year 3000. The explanation makes a lot of sense. In the second half of the episode, Fry and Michelle freeze themselves to the year 4000. There's a weird plot about children have taken over society. But it turns out they're not actually in the year 4000. They were just moved to Hollywood in the year 3000 still. And Michelle runs off with a celebrity called Pauly Shore, who I have no idea who that is. Yeah, it's a really good episode. I think the second half almost lets it down, but the first half is strong enough to hold up the episode on its own. And the second half isn't actually that bad. It's just not as good as the first half of the episode. So, yeah, very good. Very good, I think. Amazonas Women in the Mood is a decent episode. It's the birth of the Snoo Snoo meme. We get the first date between Kif and Amy. I think I'm going to put this in good around here, because while it is generally a funny episode, a lot of the stakes in this episode are kind of outweighed by not being as big as they seem as they're first presented in the episode. So yeah, I'm going to put this middle of good. I think it's let down a lot by the second half. Parasite's Lost, I'm going to put this in a league of its own. It's a really good episode. I'm going to put it between these two though. Essentially, Fry eats what they call truck stop sandwich. So I'm assuming petrol station sandwich. And he ends up getting parasites who make him smarter, stronger, faster. And Leela starts to fall in love with Fry. He gets rid of them. Decides he wants to find out whether Leela loves him for himself or who the parasites have made him. And again, it's more of this will they, won't they, with Fry and Leela. I think they skated that line really, really well in the early series, and this is a perfect example of that. Fry is actually very likeable in this episode. He's turning down being artificially stronger, smarter, etc. to be himself, to try and win Leela over himself. And I think that's a really likeable trait in a person, instead of just accepting the fact that he is stronger, smarter, whatever with the parasites. So yeah, I think A League of Its Own is a good place for this episode. Tale of Two Santas, this is my favourite Santa episode. Again, this is the reason for a lot of these episodes. The Plutonians, their song is really catchy. It's one of the best.
Roll billion gifts, and the labor isn't easy.
Then you'll all work triple shifts. You can make the job go quicker if you turn up the controls to super speed.
It's back to work on Xmas Eve. Hooray!
And though you're cold and sore and ugly, your pride will mask the pain.
Let my happy smile warm your heart. There's a toy lodged in my brain. We are getting awfully tired and we can't work any faster, and we're very, very sorry.
Why, you selfish little bastards, do you want the kids to think that Santa's just a crummy, empty-handed jerk? Then shut your yaps and back to work.
Basically, Planet Express crew have to deliver letters to Santa on planet Neptune, and he ends up getting stuck in the ice, so Bender has to be Santa. There's a really funny joke at the end where Bender's about to be executed, with the people of New York thinking that Bender is Santa. So the Planet Express crew show up as Santa, and Zoidberg randomly shows up as his friend Jesus.
I'm Santa Claus. 6.
We're also Santa Claus!
And I'm his friend Jesus.
You people aren't Santa. How dare you lie in front of Jesus? My God, the real Santa! Get him, Jesus!
I help those who help themselves.
As well as the random number generator electric chair. Hilarious. We get the first look at Kwanzaa in this episode, who isn't used anywhere near as much as he should be. And then we see Bender and Santa go off on their midnight sleigh on Christmas. It's really funny. It's really good, pretty much from start to finish. I'm going to put it at the top of very good, because I think it's my favourite Santa-based episode. Let's just put it that way. Look at the Fryrish. I'm putting this in a league of its own. I'm putting this at the top of the league of its own so far. Everyone goes on about the ending of Jurassic Park. Fine, fair enough. It's a great ending. To me, this one's a lot better. Fry's trying to find his 7-leaf clover from the 20th century, and it leads him down this rabbit hole of what a Philip J. Fry in the 20th century did with his life, the first man on Mars, and became basically a space hero. And all the way through, you can see his 7-leaf clover on the statues, on the news articles and everything like that. Fry believes it's his brother Yancey, but it turns out it was his nephew, who Yancey named in honor of Fry, and it's a really, really gut-punching ending. Fry spent this entire episode being angry at his brother, and then realizing the truth right at the end as they're digging up what he realizes now is his nephew's grave. It's a gut punch It's a gut punch ending, and it never fails to leave me in tears. It's an amazing episode. The song choice at the end is perfect. It's Don't You Forget About Me. It's one of the best episodes. Futurama is at its best when they go down these really emotional routes. I think that's like completely inarguable for a lot of Futurama fans, and this episode is one of the episodes that just do it to perfection. The Bird Barb Icecatraz, I'm going to put that in bad, because no one watches Futurama to see an episode about penguins in the polar ice caps. I'm sorry, we just don't. Bender wears a tuxedo and becomes the leader of the penguins or something, and the conservationists decide that the best thing they can do is to murder the penguins because the oil leak has caused them to reproduce at unsustainable numbers. It's all over the place. It doesn't feel like it's the plot of a Futurama episode. It just feels like the Futurama cast have just invaded another TV series, and it's not why we watch Futurama. It's not a great episode. So I'll put it in some bad and forgettable. Bender's Love is an interesting episode in that there's nothing technically wrong with it. It sees the return of Flexo, and we see Bender fall in love, which has its own funny moments. There's a weird B-plot about the professor being bent out of shape, literally bent by Bender in his sleep, and he can't become the right way up. I'm going to put this at the bottom of good, I think. The Day That Earth Stood Stupid is one of those episodes that everybody talks about with Futurama. I'm not going to put it in a league of its own, though. The Brain Spawn are an alien species that learn everything they can about a planet and then destroy it. And Fry, being as dumb as he is the perfect counter to the Brain Spawn. And they kind of invade different stories. They do parodies of different classic books, like Huckleberry Finn. I am going to put this in very good. I think I'll put it here. It is a very good episode. Especially when Fry traps them in a story of his own creation, full of plot holes and spelling errors, and they leave Earth for no reason. Hilarious stuff. So I'm going to put this in very good. That's Lobstertainment. Average. Zoidberg's uncle is a famous actor from the silent era called Harold Zoid. But the silent era of cinema in a TV series set in the year 3000 really just throws me off. It's lucky it's not going in bad, let's just put it that way. It's not a great episode. The Cyber House Rules, I'm also going to put that in average. Leela gets surgery to get 2 eyes. Bender adopts orphan children. Leela goes out with a guy called Adelaide who doesn't like her as a Cyclops. He only likes normal and average things. So perfectly understandable why this goes in average then, because it's not that funny. There's a funny plot where it turns out Bender's been selling the orphans as food. Not a plot, it's just a throwaway line, but that's pretty much the one saving grace of this episode. There's also a bit at the end as well where the girl with 3 ears is getting teased by the other orphans, but that's never ever hinted at throughout any of the other part of this episode. So that kind of comes out of left field. So, yeah, overall I think it's a forgettable episode. I think forgettable is the key word with this one. Where the Boogaloo Roam is an average episode. The crew go to Mars to visit Amy's parents and for them to meet Kif. And the native Martians have stolen all of their Bugaloos because it was their land to start off with, but the Wongs tricked them out of it. It's obviously parallel between the Native Americans and America, which I think is fine to do that sort of story with Mars and have the same sort of dynamics there as kind of like a narrative on that situation. But I think overall the execution of this episode is kind of average at best. Insane in the Mainframe is a really good episode. Essentially, Bender and Fry get framed for an armed robbery because there's too many people in the human mental home. They send Fry to a robot mental home instead, and he essentially starts believing he's a robot. It's a really funny episode. It's really good, especially with Fry trying to convince them and go more and more insane that he's a human and not a robot. Narrowly avoiding death multiple times in the episode. It's good stuff. It's really good stuff. It's really funny. Definitely, I'm going to put it... I think I'm going to put it below the Cryogenic Woman, though. Actually, thinking about it, I'm going to put your head on my shoulders up here as well. I think that needs to be a bit higher as well. The Root of All Evil is a Cuba and Dwight-based episode. It's our introduction to Dwight, Homie's son. I'm going to put this in average. I don't really care too much about the plot. Planet Express gets bought out by the boys, and they become a newspaper delivery service. And there's a plot point about them being bullied by a gelatinous blob. It's not the most memorable, it's not the most interesting episode. I'll try and skip it whenever I can. I actually really like Bending in the Wind. I'm going to put this up at low, very good. I think here is probably a good place, or maybe here. Bending in the Wind, Bender becomes a defective robot. He can't move any part of his body apart from his head. And he ends up going on tour with Beck, the singer, and there's a plot about Fry and the rest of the crew driving around in a 1970s van, like they're hippies. I'm not sure how many of those are going to be on the roads in the year 3000. I'm assuming none, but I can look past things like that. The rest of the episode is very, very good. It's very funny when Bender's literally singing the lines while I can't move my arms and legs while doing this on stage, and gets chased off by a bunch of broken, defective robots because he's become their hero. Very funny episode. Really like it. Time keeps on slipping. Oh my god, this is going in a league of its own. I'm going to put it there. The idea that the Harlem Globetrotters have moved off-world and are now an alien species that come down to Earth and challenge Earth to a basketball game is hilarious. The fact that the professor tries to build super atomic beings to face them in a basketball game and it ends up pulling chronotons out of the universe, which causes time to keep on skipping forward, is amazing. There's also a B-plot in there about Fry winning Leela over, and we skip to their wedding, but because Leela can't remember what it was, because time skipped over that part that won her over to Fry, she ends up leaving him and divorcing him pretty quick. And then at the end of the episode, we find out what it was. Fry literally moved the stars to write the note, "I love you, Leela," in the night sky, using the stars. And before he can show Leela what it was, it ends up getting destroyed while they're trying to destroy the hole in the fabric of time that the professor pulled the chronotons out from. It's that stupid, over-the-top scientific formula that we like from Futurama, that we need from Futurama. But at the same time, it's also got a lot of heart when Fry realises what won Leela over, him literally moving the stars for her, is such a gut punch when it gets destroyed. Especially since she didn't see it before it got destroyed. Brilliant. This episode is, from start to finish, with no wasted gap in there, everything that we love about Futurama. It's in a league of its own. I Dated a Robot is a weird one. I don't know whether it should go into good or very good. I'm thinking good, but I'm thinking very, very high good. There's a 50s parody in there about people dating robots. Kind of parody from those anti-gay stuff that they would run in the 1950s. They fearmonger about the end of civilization if people start dating robots. Fry goes out with a Lucy Liu robot. I mean, that's essentially the entire plot. They also get attacked by an army of Lucy Liu robots. I really like the plot twist that Napster is actually Kidnapster, and they actually kidnap celebrities to download them into robot bodies. And they use the real Lucy Liu's head to escape from all these Lucy Liu bots. And after spending the entire episode of Bender saying that humans and robots shouldn't date, for him to be dating Lucy Liu by the end of the episode is peak Futurama. It's brilliant. So I Dated a Robot is definitely going to go high good. I think this episode's a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for, because I've seen a lot of people shit on this episode online, but I think it does deserve a lot more credit than it gets. Our Leela on Our Own, you know what? Despite the fact that's called a league of their own, Leela is not going. This one is not going in there. This is going here. I don't watch Futurama to see a baseball story, and the whole idea of Leela being the worst Blurnsball, not baseball, but her being the worst Blurnsball player of all time, I didn't really care too much about it. It's not that funny of an episode. There's not enough sci-fi concepts in it for it to really be a Futurama episode, so average. A Pharaoh to Remember is fine. They go to a planet which is where the ancient Egyptians based their society on. A lot of the rulers of this planet are the deities within the ancient Egyptian culture. They kind of explain it away that this species visited Earth thousands of years ago, and the ancient Egyptians based their culture on these people. So that's why they're building pyramids. They have pharaohs and things like that. Bender becomes a pharaoh and goes power mad. It's got enough sci-fi elements. I really like it when Futurama mix the past and the future and take the past and add the sci-fi elements to it. And this is the most acceptable way of doing an ancient Egypt parody that they could have done. And I think they do it quite well. Anthology of Interest 2 is going to go into low very good. Because of the 3 stories, 2 of them are very good. It's just the Wizard of Oz parody that's not that great. I'm going to put that at the bottom of very good. There's a plot about a Space Invaders style invasion in a version of Futurama where it's based on video games, which is really funny. There's also a plot about Bender becoming human in a different segment. That's also really funny. But then they have the Wizard of Oz parody, and it's not as good. Roswell That Ends Well, I'm going to put that into a league of its own. I'm going to put it below The Look of the Friarish, though. This was the first episode of Futurama to win an Emmy, and it deserves it. The crew go back in time to 1947. Zoidberg gets captured while recovering all of Bender's broken body, and Zoidberg is the alien that landed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And his body, Bender's body, is the spaceship. The funniest part of this episode is the fact they did capture an alien in Roswell, but it's not what they think it is, and Bender's body is not because it's like a half-truth, and that's funny to me. Fry turning out to be his own grandfather is honestly genius and hilarious. And I also like how he's trying to protect his grandfather so that he will be born. This episode earned Futurama its first Emmy, not its last Emmy. We'll get to that. But it earned its first Emmy, and honestly, it deserves it. Godfellas is a good episode. The crew being attacked by space pirates, and while escaping, Bender gets thrown out of the spaceship, and is accelerating faster than the ship can accelerate, so he ends up drifting through space, possibly forever. He becomes god of a civilization, who end up nuking themselves. And then he meets what may be God, but maybe a computer that thinks it's God. And I think it's overall a really good episode. I'm going to put it here, though. I think here's a good place for it. There isn't really much I can say about the episode plot-wise. I've kind of summed up the plot entirely. The episode is sort of carried by these interactions between characters. And I think they do it so well. It's a good episode. It's really funny. Yeah, I'm going to put it in very high, very good. Future Stock takes Fry and makes him one of the least likable characters on the planet in the best way possible. He meets another defrostee, this one from the 1980s, for obviously being from the 1990s, and being guys from the 20th century, they get on really well. This guy's a corrupt businessman from the 80s and takes over Planet Express. And there's a B plot with Mum trying to buy Planet Express and the stock going up and down. I'm going to put it in very good. I'm going to put it low, very good. It's not an episode to rush back to, but I do think it's a really good episode. 30% Iron Chef, I'm going to put it in bad, honestly. Just like how I don't watch Futurama for baseball episodes or for Saving the Penguins, I don't watch it for cooking episodes, and this episode just, I don't really care about it, if I'm being completely honest with you. Elzar's a great character, and I do like scenes involving Elzar generally, but a whole episode based around cooking, it's not for me. I'm going to put that in bad. Kif Gets Knocked Up a Notch is a really good episode. It kind of takes the whole expecting a child trope and flips it on its head. Kif's the one who gets pregnant, and Amy's the one who doesn't think she's ready for it. They're going to be following this episode up with one in season 11, which I can't wait to see. And I really hope it does this episode justice. I do think it's really good. I'm going to put it at the bottom of very good. It's a really stupid sci-fi premise, but again, Futurama does stupid sci-fi premises really well, and this is no exception. There's a lot of good scenes in there with Amy being apprehensive about becoming a mother, and Kif being really excited about becoming a father. And when they follow this episode up in season 11, I really hope they do a really good job. I think it's the second episode in the revival series. Leela's Homeworld. I'm honestly going to put this in a league of its own. Around here. This is the big revelation that Leela is not in fact an alien, she's a mutant. And her parents left her on the doorstep of an orphanage with a note in an alien language so that she wouldn't be treated like a mutant. And the ending montage revealing that her parents have been looking out for her entire life. It's in the same category as The Look of the Friarish, as being one of those emotional gut punch endings that Futurama does so well. Yeah, I think A League of Their Own is a perfect place for this episode. Love and Rocket is a Valentine's Day episode. Bender falls in love with the Planet Express ship, who tries to kill them after Bender breaks up with her. And there's a B plot about Fry trying to find the right, we call them love hearts, but I think they're called candy hearts in America. The right candy heart that sums up his feelings for Leela. It's in the same league as a bike ops built for two. It's a fine episode, but ultimately forgettable and not one I'm going to rush back to see. Less Than Hero, the same thing. It's kind of bad that the first episode we get about Leela trying to bond with her parents after Leela's Homeworld is this episode, because I feel like it was, that in and of itself is a good enough plot to carry an entire episode. It didn't need the main plot to be a superhero parody. It's a fine episode, again, but it's in the same league as Love and Rocket and A Biclops Built for Two. It just could have been a lot better. It's not a bad episode by any means, but I definitely don't think it deserves to be anywhere near up here. A Taste of Freedom is a really good episode, though. I like how it critiques people who are pro-freedom, but then also think that burning a country's flag is a bad thing. Zoidberg literally eats the Earth flag on Freedom Day, and they literally want him executed for it. And it's a perfect example of that sort of tolerance. Like, how free of a free society do you want to live in? And it's that good critique of that. Zoidberg literally saving the Earth from the crustacean invasion is what gets him off the hook. And I do really like the way this episode critiques freedom as a concept. Sort of puts a mirror up and says, you know, if you want a free society, this sort of thing you need to understand. There's going to be stuff you don't like. And I think it does it so well. It's such a funny episode as well. All these people that are pro-free, they're literally wearing freedom clothes while saying Zoidberg deserves execution for what he did. And I think that that's just so perfect. So for that, I'm going to put it sort of the middle. The middle to the top are very good, I think, is a good place for this episode. Bender should not be allowed on TV. I'm going to put that a bit higher up than these ones, but it's sort of within this. It's got the same problems as these. It's kind of a clapback to a lot of these, like, you know, pearl-clutching parents that think that TV should just be this wholesome thing and there shouldn't be any edgy or middle fingers to society on TV. So I do think it's a good critique of that. but it's been done so many times, especially by Matt Groening's own creations. So it's a good episode on its own. It doesn't stand out to me in any way, so I'm going to put this in the middle of good. Alright, here we go, Jurassic Park. In my opinion, this is the most overrated episode of Futurama. However, I'm also aware of the fact that I'm probably going to be inundated with comments telling me how bad I am if I don't put this in a league of its own. It's a good episode, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it's carried too much by the end montage. The end montage is perfect. It does exactly the same thing that Look at the Friarish and Leela's Homeworld does, but I feel like the rest of the episode doesn't carry as much weight as it's very much an episode of the last 5 minutes. The rest of the episode isn't bad, but I just don't think it's carried as much as, say, Look at the Friarish is, or any of these other episodes that are higher up than it. I do think it's a good episode, though, don't get me wrong, and that gut punch at the end is so masterfully done. When I say it's the most overrated episode of Futurama, I'm still putting this in a league of its own. It's still a fantastic episode. It's still one of the best things on TV we've ever seen. When I say it's overrated, I literally mean for the people who think that it literally should be in a league of its own and no episode of Futurama can touch it. It's just not the case. So I know this sounds like I'm trashing the episode. Just remember, I'm putting it in a league of its own for a reason. It's a very, very good episode. I'm putting it here. Crimes of the Heart is a critique of climate change, and there's a big plot of Bender not being able to roll over if he falls over onto his back like a turtle. It's average, I think. Especially with the ending, sort of all the robots need to release their exhaust fumes to move the Earth slightly further away from the sun, in order to negate the effects of climate change. It's just a weird one. It feels like it doesn't know what it wants to say. It feels a bit confusing, and yeah, I'm going to put that in average. Teenage Mutant Leela's Hurdles, I'm going to put that in very good. I do think it's a really good episode. I'm going to put it a bit further up, actually. I'm going to put it here. The Why of Fry is a follow-up to the Brainspawn episode. We find out that Nibbler is the reason why Fry is in the year 3000. Nibbler was there in the year 1999 to push Fry into the freezer. And it turns out because he's his own grandfather, he doesn't have a delta brainwave for the Brainspawn to detect him. So Fry is the one person that can stop the Brainspawn. And he's given the chance to go back in time to the year 1999 and stop all of this from happening. But chooses not to, and he decides to destroy the Brainspawn. It is a really good episode. I'm going to put it a bit further up, I think. I think I'm going to put it around here. I actually like it a lot more than the first Brainspawn episode. It's a really good episode. We get the revelation of the Nibelonian Society and how they and the Brainspawn have been at war since the dawn of time, essentially. Where no fan has gone before, that's bad. That's probably the worst episode of Futurama there is. I'm not a Star Trek fan, so most of this episode was alien to me. It just being a parody of Star Trek nerds, as someone who's not a Star Trek nerd, and I know nothing about that fandom. I mean, it's not like this episode isn't without merits. It is a critique also of just general fan culture and parasocial relationships, and that can extend beyond the Star Trek fandom. It can extend into, and often does extend into, other forms of media as well. There is that, but that doesn't really stop this episode from being the mess that it is. The Sting is one of the best episodes of Futurama of all time. I'm going to put it above Look at the Friarish. The way it subverts storytelling completely. This episode should have won an Emmy. It's one of the best episodes of Futurama we've ever seen. The way that Fry gets stung by the bee and gets killed. The way Leela slowly goes insane for the loss of Fry, especially since Fry died saving her. The revelation that she's the one who actually got stung, and that she's the one in hospital, and all of this was going on in her head while Fry's actually alive, sitting at her bedside, is amazing. This is not just one of the best episodes of Futurama of all time. This is one of the best episodes of TV ever. And I'll say that completely unambiguously. This episode is a masterpiece, and I really don't say that lightly. It's an amazing episode. Ben-Hur, I'm going to put it in bad. There's obvious transphobic themes. I know, I wanted to go through this video without really mentioning any kind of politics, but it has to be said, there are a lot of transphobic themes in there, especially since sports are used as a way to attack trans people. It's aged badly. I'm not going to blame Futurama for this. This episode came out in 2002, but overall the episode itself also doesn't really stand out. I didn't care about baseball. I don't care about the Olympics. There's also a plot about Calculon falling in love with Bender. Bender not wanting to revert back to being a male because he wants to use Calculon. It's not good. It hasn't aged well, and overall, as an episode, it just isn't that good itself. Absolutely Fabulous, however, is, well, absolutely fabulous. It's going to go in very good. I'm going to put it around here. Basically, Bender's been replaced by a much better robot, and he feels obsolete, so he ends up running off instead of getting an upgrade and joining a society of obsolete robots, and downgrades himself to be made out of wood and declares war on modern technology. It's a really good episode, and it turns out it's all in Bender's head anyway as part of the upgrade process. There's not many episodes that can reveal themselves to be part of being in someone's head, and the plot of the episode doesn't really matter and still be good. But again, as the Sting showed, it can be done really well, and Absolutely Fabulous is really, really good. Now we come to the Farnsworth Paradox, which up until the revival series in 2010 was my favourite episode of Futurama. If I really enjoy sci-fi concepts in my Futurama, which I do, then the concept of an alternate reality is exactly what I want. I like the skipping around between different universes that we get at the end of this episode. I like seeing all the differences. With all these characters, they're essentially the same characters as they are in the universe we know. Their lives just took a slightly different route, and it is really fun to see that aspect. And again, it does more with this will they, won't they with Fry and Leela. At this point, it was starting to get a little bit too won't they, because they'd been doing this for 4 seasons at this point. I really hope we get a follow-up to this episode in the new season at some point, because I would like to go back and visit more realities within the Futurama universe. But this was our first introduction to it. It's really funny. It's everything I want from a Futurama episode. It really dives into that sci-fi aspect, and it's really cool to see the same characters as the ones we already know, just with their lives taking a slightly different route. I mean, I'd like to see a whole episode based in their universe, if I'm being completely honest with you. That could be something they could do, but yeah, overall, this was my favourite episode of Futurama for the longest time. 300 big boys is average. Everyone gets a $300 payout. I don't know how much $300 is going to be worth in 1,000 years. Probably not a lot. There's a B plot with Fry trying to spend $300 on coffee, which mood. I understand that completely. This episode exists. It's the most episode ever. Let's just put it that way. Spanish Fry. I'm going to put it here. Fry gets his nose taken by aliens because it's an aphrodisiac. Then they learn about the human penis. So Fry gets kidnapped by the Omicronians because they want to use his penis as an aphrodisiac. It's fine, you know, but it's ultimately This is probably the most forgettable episode of Futurama. I always forget this episode exists. But when I watch it, I don't hate it. And I do generally enjoy it. But it is very forgettable, let's just put it that way. The Devil's Hands are idle playthings. I'm actually going to put this here. It's not good enough to be in A League of Its Own, but it is very, very, very good. I'm going to put it above the series Landing in Space Pilot 3000, which I've avoided doing with most of these episodes. It is the will they, part of the will they, won't they of Fry and Leela. Fry wins a bet with the devil to win the Devil's Hands to be able to play the holophoner perfectly. Leela becomes deaf thanks to Bender messing around with air horns, and she can't hear the music he's creating. But ultimately, at the end, it doesn't really matter. Fry gets his own hand back and he sucks at the holophoner, but Leela appreciates the gesture. And this was the original series cancellation. They intended this to be the last episode of Futurama, so they did have the will they part of the will they, won't they between Fry and Leela. And if this was going to be the end of their story, you can't really ask for much more else. This was a fantastic episode. And for the original series cancellation, absolutely brilliant. Futurama came back in 2008 with a series of straight-to-DVD movies. The first one being Bender's Big Score, involving Bender downloading a computer virus and Gammas taking over the Earth. It's a really good comeback for Futurama, although it does lean back into the will they, won't they with Fry and Leela. So it kind of ruins that a little bit. I really like the end scene where the scammers have literally taken over the Earth. Everyone has to work together in order to fight them off. We even get Robot Santa working with everyone. And it's literally the big comeback for Futurama, with every single cast member of Futurama working together to try and stop the scammers. Now, I feel like there could have been a bigger threat to do this. But when it comes to the big Futurama comeback, to have the entire cast come together, even mortal enemies coming together to work together, is incredible.
Can they suit reliability? Certainly not. Use as much as you are able. You signed away your rights when you were hired. Now let's fight. Okay, chestnuts roasting. I'm gonna open fire. Prepare for gore galore. This Trinity's going to war.
There's also a B plot with Leela falling in love with someone called Lars, who turns out to be Fry, from an alternate but not alternate timeline, where Bender was sent back in time to the year 2000, and in the year 2012 thinks he's killed Fry but hasn't killed Fry. It's confusing, but it's meant to be confusing because it's a time paradox. It's a really good film. It's a good comeback for Futurama. I just feel like there's aspects of it that could have been done a bit differently to make the stakes feel a bit bigger, but there are a lot of aspects to this which make it a great Futurama comeback. The Beast with the Billion Backs is another good one. Right at the end of Bender's big score, a crack opens up in the universe itself, and then we go straight into a Beast with a Billion Backs. It turns out it's actually an alien from another dimension called Evo, attached itself to every living thing in the universe, and they all fall in love with it. All jealousy and hatred goes from the universe, and they try, all the living organisms try and leave the universe, leaving it to the robots. But the robots decide they want all the living organisms back, so they fight to get them back. And what I like about this is that there's nothing actually sinister about Evo, despite the fact that we believe there is throughout the entire film. Evo just wanted to have people to love and to love it. And there was nothing sinister about Evo. He just wanted to have peace with everyone. And I think that's a great plot twist for this film. And it was literally Bender's jealousy that brought everybody back. And I think that's such a good plot twist, because the person we're rooting for has the evil intentions, and the person that we're not rooting for has the good intentions. And I think that's such a good subvertive of the narrative that, yeah, Beast with a Billion Backs is a great way to follow up from Bender's big score, I think. What isn't a great way to follow up from Bender's big score is Bender's game. I'm going to put it here. It's kind of like a World of Warcraft style Dungeons and Dragons. I think Dungeons and Dragons is probably the best. I think it is a parody of Dungeons and Dragons. As someone who's never played D&D, I don't understand this sort of stuff. I've never played World of Warcraft either. I think it's Dungeons and Dragons though. It's kind of like this medieval fantasy style environment take on Futurama. Bender has basically opened up his imagination, and it's become too powerful and it's sucked everybody in, type of thing. So there is like a sci-fi element to it, but overall it's just an excuse for them to do a medieval episode. It's funny in places, but overall a whole film length of this, a whole film length of just that, I'm going to put it in good. I think that's the best place. I think I'm being a bit nice to this one to put it in good. Into the Wild Green Yonder, I'm going to put this around the same place. It just has too much going on with it. Into the Wild Green Yonder just has too much on its plate, and it just tries to fit way too much in the runtime. And I just think that at this point we were kind of over the films, and we just wanted to see a Futurama comeback, which this does lead into. But I feel like we could have done without these two, and we could have just launched straight from The Beast with a Billion Backs. I feel like I think unneeded is the word for these two films. Yeah, I think that's the right word for it. Next we have Rebirth, which is the series actual coming back. They kind of go for a whole, the characters are actually being reborn into the new series type of dynamic. It launches straight from the ending of Into the Wild Green Yonder, where they've jumped into a wormhole that can take them anywhere, and they end up outside of the Planet Express building. They end up crashing, and most of the characters get killed, and the professor has to rebirth them with his machine. There's a plot twist where Leela hasn't been rebirthed and she's actually dead, and Fry gets a robot Leela, but it turns out Fry also died. I appreciate the analogy there that the Planet Express crew are Futurama being reborn, so I'm going to put that here. In a guide to Leela sleeps with Zap again because he tricks her into thinking that the Earth and civilization is over, which is quite disgusting. But Zap is a disgusting character. Overall, it's a boring episode. You know, it wasn't a great launch into this new series. It would get a lot better, but it's quite boring. That's the best word I can say for it. Attack of the Killer App, I'm going to put this in bad. I don't like when Futurama gets too topical, especially when it comes to things like this. Apps were a relatively new thing in 2010. I didn't even have a smartphone when this episode came out. I hadn't moved into the smartphone era. I didn't move into having a smartphone until 2012. So I didn't have any apps myself, so I didn't really relate with this. So the whole panic of, like, you know, apps and how much can they, how much do they sucker you in to waste your time and stuff like that was like a big debate going on at the time. There was also a B plot about Leela having a singing boil called Susan, which was an outdated reference at the time. No, it's one of those episodes where Futurama where I will go out of my way to skip this one, just like the rest of these in this bottom row. Proposition Infinity, I think forgettable is the best word for it. Something to do with Amy and Bender falling in love, but it's illegal, but they're trying to make it legal, but Amy's still with Kif. This episode exists. This is where the revival series of Futurama started to get good. The Da Vinci Code. It turns out that Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest inventors in history, is actually an immortal alien, and is actually one of the dumbest of his species. That's hilarious. Fry and the Professor end up finding his secret lab. They find his spaceship and they go to his home planet. And it turns out the Professor is a dumb shit compared to Da Vinci species as well. I just love that fish out of water style of humour with the Professor being stupid. The whole plot of this episode is really good. So, I know that a lot of people don't like this episode, but I do. I think it's a really good episode. I don't think it should be that high up in very good, actually. I think I should put it about around here. But I think that's a good place to put it. I don't want to put it any lower than that. So I think that's a good place for it. Lethal Inspection. It has one of those gut-punching endings that Futurama's really known for. I'm going to put it here, I think. Because just like Jurassic Park, I think it is largely carried by that gut-punch ending. But the rest of the episode don't hold up as much as Jurassic Park. Maybe it does, actually. I think I want to put it here, actually. Basically, robots are made with a backup drive. For if they die, they can just be downloaded into a new body. Bender doesn't have that backup drive, so when he dies, he's dead for good. So he has to grapple with his own mortality. And he's trying to find someone called Inspector 5 who approved him. Hermes goes with him to try and find out who this Inspector 5 was. Turns out Hermes was Inspector 5 and was ordered to kill a baby Bender who's sitting there drinking his oil out of a bottle, literally looking like a baby, and he can't bring himself to do it. And that ending just, it tears me up. Hermes refuses to do it. He overrides the error code and signs Bender off as being a fine unit to send out into the world. Quits his job and moves out of Tijuana where he's living at the time. And Bender never finds any of this information out. And it's so gut-wrenching and such a stomach punch. Like, these episodes have a way with the way that they do the music, the way that they do the scene editing, just these gut punch finishes. Futurama does them better than any other TV series, and I really hope we get a good few more of them in the new revival series, because Lethal Inspection is the first one we got for the revival series from 2010, and it does it so freaking well. It's definitely on the same level as Jurassic Park and Look at the Fry-Rich, and it's not even the last time they do it either. Remember how I said the Farnsworth Paradox was my favourite episode of Futurama before the revival series? Here's the episode that knocked it down a peg. The Late Philip J. Fry. Amazing episode. This was Futurama's second Emmy win, and it deserves it. It's another time travel episode. Fry keeps being late to dates with Leela, so she gives him one more chance, and he doesn't show for it. Because the professor's invented a forwards-only time machine, and instead of only going forward a few seconds like he wanted to, they end up going forward through time 10,000 years. So they have to keep jumping forward through time, try and find a time when a backwards time machine has been invented. All of the different time eras we get to see is so much... It's such futuristic sci-fi fun that Futurama does so well as the emotional gut punch of seeing Leela grow old, thinking that Fry just left her, and not having any explanation, is so well done. And it's so funny. The way Bender wants to just stay in the future where robots have taken over the planet and are killing humans. But Fry and the Professor jump forward through time and find a society which has hardly any men, and there's just these really big-boobed, hourglass-shaped women just looking to sleep with any man they can. And Bender jumps forward from there. Hilarious. And the resolution as well. that they've gone too far, that they've reached the end of the universe trying to find this backwards time machine, and they just accept their fate and see the universe go out, only for the universe to be recreated again, that the universe goes round on this endless loop. Kind of like the Big Bounce theory in real life physics is such a good concept. As someone who's a big proponent of the Big Bounce theory myself, seeing, if not that, but a very similar concept play out on mainstream TV was such a good thing to see. It was so satisfying to see that. Yeah, this episode really deserves Futurama's second Emmy. That Darn Cats is an overrated episode. That doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it's overrated. I'm not as big of a cat person as a lot of people who love this episode are, so it didn't resonate that much with me. I did like the little cat dance at the end. That really made me laugh at the time. I rewound that so many times to watch that over and over again. Basically, turns out cats are actually aliens and that their cuteness is just done to brainwash a civilization. There's too many 2010 cat memes in there. It's basically a whole episode of the I Can Has Cheeseburger meme, which I think was outdated for 2010 as well. But it was essentially the 2010 era of memes, which was funny in 2010. But looking back at it now in 2023, I'm going to put it at the bottom of very good. Because overall the story is still enjoyable. You just have to look past a lot of the very outdated memes. And this is what I'm on about when I don't like Futurama going too topical. Because weirdly for a series set in the year 3000, it just makes the series feel dated. A lot of these episodes are timeless when they go too topical. It really drags the episode down because they become a product of their time, which is very strange to say about a series set 1,000 years in the future. A Clockwork Origin, however, is a really good episode, and I'm going to put that in very good. I'm going to put this around... I'm going to put this around here, I think. It's really funny opening how a talking ape doesn't believe in evolution. He believes in a creator, and the professor literally rage quits the Earth because his idea of evolution is laughed at, and tries to live on a planet on his own, only to see evolution take place in front of him as nanobots that he put down on this new planet evolve into robot dinosaurs, and then they evolve into robot people, and then they see this really quick evolution, and then when he brings this evidence back to Earth, Dr. Banjo is just there like, I see, so evolution is real, thanks to a creator, and that just drives Farnsworth completely nuts. It's such a good episode. Prisoner of Brenda, I'm also going to put in very good as well. I love body switching shenanigans, and this episode has it in droves. It's really funny seeing these odd pairings of characters doing things that they really wouldn't do because they have somebody else's mind in their body. The most disturbing of which is seeing Zoidberg and the Professor make out on a table in a restaurant because they got Fry and Leela's brain in there. And the revelation that Scruffy's mop bucket is in love with him. Hilarious. Amazing. Brilliant. Yeah, The Prisoner of Brenda is going to go in very good. But like middle of very good. But still, that's still a good placement for this episode. Lure concealable indifferences. Lure under get divorced. Lure goes on a midlife crisis. This episode exists. The Mutants Are Revolting was an episode they really needed to tackle. The whole mutants are a second-class citizen, they're not even allowed on the surface, was like a very problematic aspect of the very early parts of the show, and they kind of recognised that in the revival and they wanted to do something about it. This episode is literally about the mutants wanting equal rights, and this episode was largely overdue, but the substance of the episode isn't as good as it should be. This should have been a big monumental episode, and it doesn't feel that way. And there's a B-plot about Leela thinking that Fry's been grotesquely mutated. But it turns out it's actually the grotesquely mutated husband of one of the anti-mutant campaigners. Which is funny. That is funny in and of itself. But the substance of the episode could have been a lot better. So I'm going to put it in very good, but low very good. The Futurama Holiday Spectacular is the weakest Christmas episode of Futurama. It's another sort of 3 non-canon anthology episode, but it's nowhere near as good as the Anthology of Interest episodes. There's an episode about Christmas, which is fine. It is what it is. There's an episode about Kwanzaa, and there's an episode about Robonica as well, which overall the episode doesn't really do much. You know, I'm gonna put it at the bottom of good. Silence of the Clamps, I'm not really that into either. Bender goes into witness protection, and Clamps is sent to apply to be the new robot at the Planet Express crew to try and find Bender. And it turns out he's actually a hillbilly living on the moon. There's not really much I can say about some of these like poorer episodes of the Futurama. They're either largely forgettable, or I can sum up the plot in 3 minutes. Well, 30 seconds. Mobius Dick is a good episode though. This explores the Professor's old Planet Express crew and why they're not around anymore. They got eaten by a space whale. And then Fry and the rest of the current Planet Express crew also get eaten by the space whale, which leads to them bringing the space whale back to Earth and bringing the original crew back. There's also a little cameo of Tom Baker's Doctor Who in there, which is funny. It's a very good episode, but I'm going to put it sort of the middle of very good. It's around this sort of quality. Law and Oracle. Fry becomes a police officer, and they start arresting people before they commit crimes, thanks to an Oracle robot. I'm going to put it here. It's a fine episode, but overall inconsequential. Benderama sees Bender get the ability to clone himself, but I'd say forgettable is the main part of this episode. Tip of the Zoidberg is a good episode, though. I'm going to put this one in very good. It explains why the Professor keeps Zoidberg around despite being a terrible doctor. It turns out that 80 years earlier, the Professor contracted a disease, and Zoidberg promised to stick around with the Professor. It's also revealed that he was actually a very good doctor back in the day, and turned down a very highly paid position at Mom Corporation in order to look after the Professor, just in case he ever turns into a Yeti, which he did in this episode. It's a really good episode and really explores the backstory of Zoidberg and what connection he has to the Professor, and why he hasn't been fired in all this time despite being terrible at his job. Yeah, I think it's a really good episode, and very good. I think it's a good place for it. Ghost in the Machine is an episode where Bender dies and starts haunting Fry, so Fry goes to live on an Amish farm. It's a fine episode. There's not really too much to write home about with this one. Newtopia is a terrible episode. Beyond bad. It takes an already boring concept of boys versus girls, but turns it up to 11. There's not really much else I can say about it. It's bad / forgettable. Yo Lila Lila is the same thing. She starts writing a kids' TV show that's basically a parody of Yo Gabba Gabba, and it turns out she's actually just observing an alien species and writing down the things they get up to in their lives. But overall, it's not a great episode. I don't think it's the worst episode of Futurama though. I'm going to put this a bit higher up on bad, but I don't think it really matters where I put things in bad. Fry and the Eggman. It's a good episode. It's just ultimately largely forgettable. All the President's Heads though I really like. It's another time travel episode, but instead of just being just a generic episode where they invent a time machine, it turns out that the liquid that the... So since the start of Futurama, they've had heads in jars, and they've never really explained how they work until this episode where the Professor kind of theorizes that the liquid that they're in kind of acts as like a stasis in time, I think, is the best way to explain it. And it kind of holds them in this sort of suspended time animation. So that's kind of what's happening. So when they drink the liquid from the different presidents' heads, they go back in time to those eras. And they have to try and stop historical plot and clear Farnsworth's family name, because he was basically a traitor to the United States during the founding of the US. His ancestors were. So it's a good episode, but it left me scratching my head a lot. I didn't quite understand it entirely. Cold Warriors is a good concept, but it's sort of average execution. The Cold's been extinct for about 800 years, and Fry kind of brings it to the future, which leads to them being quarantined. I don't remember much about this episode, to be completely honest with you. It's a good concept, the idea of the Cold being extinct in the future, and Fry being the one to bring it to the future, but I think in execution, it doesn't live up to the idea, so I'm going to put that in good. Overclockwise, I'm going to put this in very good. I feel like if that darn Cats is in very good, then so should Overclockwise, but I'm going to put it here. It's going to be quite low. Basically, Bender gets overclocked and can see the future, essentially, by the end of the episode, and shows Fry and Leela how their relationship is going to end up. All sorts of shenanigans happen throughout the episode. It's a very good episode, which is why it's in very good, but overall, There are episodes I prefer to this one for in Futurama. Reincarnation is another anthology episode, and just like Anthology of Interest 2, two of the stories in this are good, but one of them isn't. I like the segment involving reality actually just being a 8-bit video game, which has a really funny ending to it, where the professor has discovered everything and there's nothing else to learn, and it's all thanks to this one thing that all these characters can see, but we can't, because it's an 8-bit video game and it can't be displayed in 8-bit, which is really funny, which leads to the professor having an existential crisis because there is nothing else to discover. First part is like a black and white homage to 1930s cartoons, which is really, really well done. But the third part, being an anime parody, doesn't do much for me. It's not a great parody. It doesn't take the mick out of anime enough. But it also doesn't feel like a love letter to anime either. It just kind of feels like a Futurama plot in that style of animation. And that's what lets this episode down for me. The first two segments are really good, and that third segment is just not as good. The Bots and the Bees, I'm going to put that in good. Bender ends up impregnating a vending machine, and she walks out on Bender and Ben, and there's a plot with Ben wanting to be the vending machine like his dad, but he doesn't have the card in his head in order to become a vending machine, and with only one slot for memory in Ben, he has to forget who Bender is in order to achieve his dreams. And it's another episode with a decent gut punch ending, because Bender chooses that his son's dreams is more important than his happiness to spend time with his son and to be a part of his son's life. It's that different side of Bender where we actually get to see him be this sentimental character and be selfless for once. I'm going to put this in good. A Farewell to Arms, I'm also going to put this in good. It's another episode that dates it a lot. This episode came out in 2012 because they find a Mayan calendar from Mars that predicts the end of the world in the year 3012. So they all start escaping Earth, at least the people who have chosen to. But it turns out, because it's a Martian Mayan calendar, it actually predicts the end of the planet on Mars. So it ends with them trying to escape back to Earth, which is a funny little plot twist. But again, you'd think people like the Professor would also understand that this is a Martian tablet predicting the end of the world. Why would it be on about the Earth? But then again, watching it at the time, I also didn't pick up on that. And it was still a plot twist to me. So it was still a decent plot twist at the time, but it just dates it a lot. You know, you hear about a Mayan prediction for the end of the world, it really places it in 2012. If you were around at the time with people going crazy about that prediction, it really dates this episode. And that's probably the biggest problem with a lot of these episodes, is that a lot of these feel dated when they try to get too topical. So there's that one. I know what I've just said, that things feeling too dated makes them bad. I know I've also said I don't like when Futurama literally just does episodes about political races. But Decision 3012 is a really good episode. It really adds its own flair to it to make it not only... It is topical because it's based on the whole 2012 debate between Donald Trump and Barack Obama over Barack Obama's birth certificate and whether or not he was actually born in Kenya or whether was he born in Hawaii, and all of that debate going on. Chris Travers is running for president of Earth, and Richard Nixon accuses him of not being born on Earth. So they have to get his birth certificate, or his Earth certificate as they call it, because he was actually born in a hospital in Kenya. So we can very clearly see a lot of the parallels with that real life debate. Turns out Chris Travers does not have an Earth certificate until tomorrow, because it's actually from the future. Bender has actually led a robot uprising to destroy the Earth and kill all the humans. And Chris Travers has been sent back in time to win the election, to stop Richard Nixon from building a wall around the Earth, to stop the alien immigrants from coming in, and which has led to a robot uprising. You can see the parallels to the way things have worked out with actual real life political debates. So I do think this episode does date itself, but with the plot twist of Travers being from the future, and I think with how unapologetic it is about dating itself in a lot of these ways, I kind of respect it. That's why Decision 3012 is going into the high section are very good for me. I do really like this episode. The Thief of Baghead is a good episode, but I'm going to put it towards the bottom of good. Basically, there's a really famous actor called Langdon Cobb who no one's ever seen the face of. Bender becomes a paparazzi, and you can kind of see where this episode goes. It's said that if any living organism sees Langdon Cobb's face, they will essentially become too shocked by what he actually looks like. And we see multiple characters become just husks after seeing photos of Langdon Cobb's actual face. They've got to basically destroy Langdon Cobb's ego in order to bring everybody back to their own bodies. And actually, this episode does something I really respect. They really break the status quo by having Calculon die for real at the end of this episode. And that break from the formula is something that Futurama hadn't really done much before. Especially killing off a main character like Calculon. You know, actually going ahead and doing that. And he stays dead after this episode as well. I really respect that. But I like also the commentary as well about the sort of pompousness of actors and how they can be very pretentious, like Langdon Cobb is, and how ego-driven they are. It's literally his ego. It gets hurt by hurting his ego. It's a good episode. It is a really good episode. I'm just going to put it at the bottom of very good. I think that's where it should go. Zap Dingbat, I'm also going to put that in very good. But again, I'm going to put that around the bottom of very good. Essentially, Leela's parents are getting divorced, and Zap falls in love with Leela's mom. Leela believes that it's a plot for Zap to get closer to her, and despite the fact that her and Fry are dating in the revival series, she tries to seduce Zap in order to get her mom to realise that it's just a plot to get closer to Leela. There's a B plot as well about the Earth potentially going to war with an alien species, and Zap needing to use Leela's mom Munda's alien translating ability in order to stop that from happening, although it is actually a trick from Zap, which causes Munda to leave Zap. I like the plot twist of the fact that Zap actually did want to be with her, although he does get over not being with her pretty quickly. But I like the plot twist that it wasn't actually a plot from Zap. He did actually love Munda, even though he does support her leaving him, and he does support her getting back together with Morris at the end of the episode, Leela's dad. So I'm going to put this at the bottom of very good. But it's still a very enjoyable episode to watch. The Butter Junk Effect, I'm going to put that at the bottom of good. Don't think it deserves to be an average, but I don't really care too much. Leela and Amy become murderfly fighters, and they end up juicing on butterfly nectar in order to become better fighters, and it's a episode about juicing for sports. I don't think it deserves to be an average. It's definitely better than all of these, but it probably bump it up a little bit though. I'll probably put it to about here. But yeah, I think that's a good placement for it. The $6 Million Mon freaks me out a lot. Seeing Hermes cut up body parts is just weird. I could have done without this episode, to be completely honest with you. Hermes just starts upgrading his body until he becomes a giant mech version of himself. But this episode just makes me feel all kinds of weird. It's not a bad episode, which is why I put it in good, but it just makes me feel too weird seeing this one. I'm not a huge fan of it, to be completely honest with you. Fun on the Bun, I'm going to put it in average. They go to Oktoberfest, which is less of a party and more of a sophisticated soiree sort of thing, which Fry doesn't like, so he ends up making an ass of himself. Leela believes he's fallen into a mincer and that she's eaten him, which causes her to mourn him. But instead of leaning into the insanity that she got from thinking that he died in the sting, but whereas in the sting she went insane thinking that Fry had died and they weren't even together in that episode, they kind of just have her sad in this one. And then they do a plot where she suffers and she gets Fry cut out from her memory, and Fry suffers a head injury so he doesn't remember, and then turns out that cavemen are still alive. They don't remember each other. They start a war against each other. It's really weird. Free Will Hunting tackles the idea of Bender not having free will and having to deal with that. It's a good episode. I feel like the idea, again, is a lot better than the execution. So I'm going to put that at the bottom of very good. I do like the fact that they tackled the idea of robots in Futurama not having free will despite being sentient beings. It's something that did need tackling, but I feel like the idea was a lot better than the execution. The near-death wish. Fry feels neglected by the professor as a family member, so he starts getting closer to the professor's parents on the near-death star, which causes the professor to get closer to his parents, which he hasn't been for decades. Again, another episode that had stronger idea than execution. Again, it's in very good though, so it's not like it's an episode that I'm trashing, but it's definitely an episode that I don't think needs to be much higher than this. 31st Century Fox can stay in average though. It's boring. It's a fox hunting episode. You know, how interesting can that be? I like the plot twist of the fox. Bender not caring about the fox hunt until he finds out it's a robot fox, and then he does care. Viva Mars Vegas, I don't really care about either. It's a gambling episode. I'm not too keen on gambling. Like I'm not too interested in gambling. Just like I'm not too interested in fox hunting. I'm not too keen in baseball. I'm not too interested in baseball. It's just not an episode that appeals to me. Naturama can get in the bin though. It's a 3-segment episode based on if the Futurama cast were animals, and they're all pretty forgettable. The best one there being the professor being a Galapagos turtle, but overall it's a boring episode. We've got a segment about Fry being a fish, and we've got an episode about walruses. 40% lead belly. I don't care about gambling. I don't care about fox hunting. I don't care about country music. It's just another episode that just doesn't appeal to me. 2D Blacktop, the professor becomes a drag racer. There's a really clever scene towards the end where they mess around with dimensions, and especially things being 2D, moving to a 2D plane, which is really clever. But overall, I don't really care about the substance of the episode. So, T the Terrestrial takes the ET formula and flips it on its head, being an Omicronian, being the child that has an extraterrestrial pet, the extraterrestrial being Fry. I've criticised other Futurama film parodies for leaning too much into the film parody and trying to let the humour be, look how we're taking the piss out of this film. I much prefer it when it's A Flight to Remember, where the film parody is there, but it stands on its own 2 legs. This episode really relies on, look at this is a film parody, being its humour. So, yeah, I think that's a good placement for it. Fry and Leela's Big Fling is a good episode. I'm going to put this around here. They try and get a romantic getaway when they can't get any alone time, only to find Leela's ex-boyfriend Sean is also at the same retreat they are, because his transport has broken down. Him and his girlfriend can't leave, which puts a sour taste in their mouths for the rest of the trip. And then it turns out that their resort is actually just in a zoo on a planet run by apes. It doesn't really have a good resolution. It kind of rushes to the finish, which I think lets this episode down quite a lot. But overall, I think the substance of the rest of this episode is pretty good. The Inhuman Torch is forgettable. It's average at best. Bender becomes a firefighter. The rest of the crew suspect that he's the one starting the fires, but it turns out it's a criminal from the sun who's trying to wipe out all life on Earth, and Bender's actually the hero of the story. Saturday Morning Fun Pit is going to go in bad/forgettable. I don't like when they do these parodies where they just really lean into the parodies. It's a 3-segment story again, which they really love doing them in the revival. There's a Scooby-Doo parody. There's a Strawberry Shortcake parody in 2013. And then the last part is a G.I. Joe parody, which Richard Nixon has adapted for modern sensibilities, where they take out all references to violence and all swearing. And it's not even like it... I'm going to move that up because Naturama is my least favourite episode. It leans too much into the parodies to be good. Way too much into the parodies. Calculon 2.0 sees a return of Calculon and then subsequent second death of Calculon. For him to come back to find out he's actually a joke to the world because of his over-dramatic acting, which causes him to become a lot more humble and deliver the best acting scene he's ever done. I'm going to put that around War is the H word because I feel like it's around this sort of quality episode, as in something I'll sit there and watch, but not something I'll seek out for a Futurama episode. Again, Futurama is a series that has the bar set all the way up here. The bar is set so high that perfectly fine episodes can be put here. Assy Come Home, it's not really that funny. Bender finds his ass as a reflector for a lighthouse in outer space. What else can I say about it? Leela and the Gene Stalk. Turns out that her mutant genes are starting to get the better of her and she's literally turning into a squid. There's jokes in there about Monsanto, called Mom Santo. It's a bit of a Jack and the Beanstalk parody as well, but It kind of does its parody the same way that A Flight to Remember does its parody. You can tell that it's a parody of Jack and the Beanstalk, but it also has enough of its own storytelling to really carry the episode. But I just don't feel like the storytelling that it is doing is strong enough to really carry the episode in the same way. So, yeah, I'm going to put it in good, like mid to high good, I think is a good place for it. Game of Tones is a weird one because it is another episode that has one of those gut punch endings, but the rest of the episode doesn't carry enough weight. So I'm going to put this at the bottom of very good. Basically, there's a giant tone that may destroy the Earth, and they've got to find out what it is, and they find out it's something to do with a connection to Fry's past. So they go into Fry's memories to try and to go through his last day in the year 1999 to find out what it could be. And completely anticlimactically, it just turns out to be a locator for the spaceship that the Nibelians drive. Again, it's not a strong story, but at the end, as a thank you for saving the Earth, Nibbler sends Fry back to the year 1999, and Fry just assumes this is just him dreaming again, but it turns out that Nibbler actually put Fry into his mum's dream so he can have that last moment with his mum before, like, on the night that he disappeared. So it's another gut punch. It's another gut punch ending, and just the ending on its own should put this higher, but the rest of the episode just does not hold enough weight on its own. So I think this is a good place to put it. It really is carried by the last 5 minutes of it. Murder on the Planet Express is a really good episode. I really enjoy this one. I'm going to put this high, very good. Yeah, okay, the episode invents bullshit reasons for the crew not to trust each other, but I think that's part of the joke as well. They're kind of out of the blue, out of left field, but they've never been brought up before, but they're just excuses for the crew to not trust each other to go on a team building exercise. They take the Thing formula and really make it play into this type of story. With a shape-shifting alien that can eat people and can be any one of your friends, setting it up with a story about mistrust is the perfect setup for this. So, it has the perfect setup. It's an interesting story throughout. I mean, it's a shape-shifting alien slowly eating the main cast. And they do have most of the main cast get eaten. And the plot twist at the end was sort of, can we trust it, can we not trust it? Until it makes it painfully obvious what the actual truth is. But overall, it's just such a fun ride. Set up from the right setup as well. And it's funny in all the right places. Yeah, this is high, very good. Stench and Stenchability I really appreciate for the fact that it actually gives Zoidberg a happy ending. Which, especially with it being the second to last episode of the revival run, he really needed. I'm going to put this around the middle of very good. I like how they don't just do a cop-out ending where she ends up leaving him. She ends up staying with him. Basically, Zoidberg's got himself a new girlfriend who can't smell, and that's obviously the main thing that puts people off from Zoidberg. Zoidberg encourages her to have an operation to bring back her sense of smell, knowing it's going to cause her to leave him. But she hates the smell of flowers, and she hates the smell of things that other people consider good smells. But she loves the smell of Zoidberg because she's never smelled anything before. She doesn't know how to differentiate between good smells and bad smells, but she knows that she likes Zoidberg, therefore she likes his smell. And I really like that explanation. I really like the fact they didn't do a cop-out and they gave Zoidberg a happy ending. That's what I appreciate the most about this episode, and that's why it's in very good. Meanwhile is, up until the new revival run, the last episode of Futurama. And they wrote it with that in mind. I'm putting this in a league of its own. Because if this really was the last episode of Futurama, it would have been a perfectly acceptable last episode of Futurama. And it was for 10 years. Basically, the professor has invented a button that goes back in time 10 seconds. And no more. Fry tries to kill himself by jumping off the Vampire State Building, thinking that Leela's left him. Only to see Leela walking towards the building. Presses the button to reverse time. Turns out he jumped off 12 seconds earlier. So he's in a repeating loop and there is no way he can get out of it alive. Until they end up breaking the button and freezing all of time apart from Fry and Leela, who are within the bubble that's protected from the time freeze. And Fry and Leela spend their entire lives together with the rest of the world frozen as this perfect snapshot of the world as we know it and we love it. And it's such a beautiful episode, not told through jokes, not told through even a lot of plot, just told through characters and told through what drives these characters. And after 10 years of going through the will they won't they with Fry and Leela, for it to be really will they, with this episode showing that they would be together forever, is the perfect cap off, and that iconic line of the professor finding them by slipping through that time stream, asking if they want to live out their lives again, and Leela asking Fry the classic line, "Do you want to go round again?" If that was the last episode of Futurama, would have been a perfect ending for Futurama. If that was the last episode of Futurama, no one would have complained, and it was for 10 years, and everyone said it was perfect. Let's just hope that the new revival series, however long that lasts, however they try and leave Futurama next time, is just as good as Meanwhile.